to the latest edition of the SG3 podcast. I'm your host, Trevon. I'm also the guy who got the nickname from his middle school coach, SG3. And the guy who's stopping by today is a guy from out in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon. He's a Twitter sportsaholic. He knows his stuff, and he just loves to talk whatever comes to his mind. It's like Charles Barkley. I say what I want to say. My man, Alex Schiefelbein. What's going on?
Hey, what's up? I'm excited. When we first met on a Bengals space, and I want to give a shout out to these guys. Hopefully, this makes it to them on Twitter. It's Zim and Game On. The Bengals fans run this Twitter space on a daily basis, hundreds of them, and it is a very positive, a very thought provoking, a very awesome fan base to jump into. And Trevon and I ran into each other one day, and we are going back and forth, just talking ball. And we had an absolute blast. So I was super excited that we were able to connect and ultimately have an opportunity to just talk ball and talk life and whatever else comes along. I think it'll be a lot of fun just to unpack whatever comes up.
And for those of you who are following along, please subscribe to my channel, but also follow us on Twitter. We will be putting up on our social media platforms. Alex will be retweeting this episode when it comes out. So give him a follow whenever you can get a chance. Like, subscribe, and as they say, let's get it on. So, Alex, speaking of the how we met, let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from, and give us your backstory. How'd you get into this?
Yeah, so media has been more recent. I would say, I was an athlete until I was about 21 years old. So I didn't have a whole lot of time for hobbies, right? It was like practice, class, food, meeting, another practice, or weights, whatever it was. Being a student athlete, it's hard. Pat McAfee spoke about it last night in his opening monologue. Like there's sacrifices you make. And I did that for 19 years. And then the last two, I was kind of a coach, and then I snuck back into football right as COVID happened, and I dropped off. But yeah, I was born in South Dakota. My parents are both from the Midwest. I moved down to Texas, just north of Dallas, in a football town called Salina. Kenny Chesney did his Boys of Fall video there. So, you kind of imagine the environment that I was raised in. And so football was it for me. And my parents moved me to Omaha, Nebraska when I was 16. I took a walk-on spot at South Dakota State, got cut immediately after my first year, and started coaching. And I did some recruiting. I did, offensive quality control, worked through fall camp, did all the grunt work, shot the film, prepped the playbook, worked with the scout team, making sure those guys were doing their jobs. And then after that, I actually went to a cyber terrorism school for 6 months, right when COVID was kind of at the cusp of everything in 2020. And I was playing ball again. And after that spring semester, I was just like, you know what, it's time to go home. Let's go to work and kind of figure out a different path. I've always wanted to stay around sports, and I've always been engulfed in it, no matter what I was doing professionally. And the quick background about my professional background, my first job was in commercial HVAC. So I worked in industrial heating and air with cooling towers and chemicals, and it was blue collar. I went from that to healthcare recruiting, and I recruited all kinds of nurses during the pandemic and sent them all over the country. And then now I am a security contractor of sorts. I do some military, some federal government work, but then mostly professional sports franchises. We'll work with the Blazers out here in the Northwest, the MLS, the Timbers, the Kraken. We do some X-ray and metal detection and things like that for them. So I've kind of been all over. I pride myself in that. I'm lucky and fortunate to be able to say that. And I'm excited to just share what I know, and also, go back and forth on what we think is going to happen this year, and, whether it be sports or the news, whatever it might be. So.
Absolutely. Speaking of news, you and I were talking about this earlier. ESPN had a big number of layoffs, including a number of big name personalities. Susie Colbert, Steve Young, Max Kellerman, Keyshawn Johnson are to name a few. When you first heard about these layoffs, now granted, none of us work for ESPN. Neither of us do. So let's get that out of the way. But when we heard about these layoffs that were coming, Andrew Marchand had reported it in the New York Post prior to all of this happening. And when it came down, there were definitely some thoughts about those who let go. We wish them nothing but the best, of course. But when you heard that, Alex, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
Well, when you think layoffs in mass, okay, and at Sports Center, what's interesting about it is their support staff is much larger than their entertainers, right? They have a group of entertainers, a group of people that have slots, right, nightly, daily. But you look at, who's working the camera, who's working the graphics and putting out all the marketing. So when you look at an organization like that, your first thought is, well, is money tight, right? Like, why would they be needing to cut down on payroll for one reason or another? But then you ultimately look at the individual, because that's who they let go, were individuals who built brands, who tried to really find a niche in Sports Center, right, and get really good at one thing and stay focused on one thing. And Kellerman was the most interesting to me, because him and Stephen A, right, had a really great, show for a little while. And it was opposing viewpoints, which I loved. I think it got a little too showy. I think we could all agree with that. I think there were little there's video clips from their shows over the years that will hang in there forever as just like, what the heck was even going on? Like, why are these guys yelling at each other? And so, yeah, there's a lot of different things to look at when you have mass layoffs in media, right? And it could be traction. We were talking about it kind of before we started this podcast. Sports Center and all these professional sports franchises, they blast the same content on 6 different platforms, right? You'll see an account with 20 million followers get 28 likes on a post, right? They're not getting what they used to, right? And once they just kind of flooded social media. And I think that led to a lot of turmoil. It led to a lot of misappropriation of funds. And I think that there was probably more layoffs, right? Because with every individual that got laid off, well, that show and that staff that runs that show probably got cut loose or repositioned somewhere. And so it's a really big deal. And so it was sad. Jalen Rose, I enjoyed him. Every once in a while I'd run into him on the NBA. I know he did a daily show, so I didn't always have time to get to that. But Max Kellerman, for me, that was the one that stuck out. It was like, man, he's been a long stay there. And he's been a main point. And, Stephen A really was the show. Gotta give credit where it's due. I love Stephen A. Sometimes, most of the time, not all the time.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah.
I think it's interesting. I don't know exactly why. There's a lot of big companies laying people off, big accounting firms, different companies that are large like that are making moves, almost preparing for something negative, I suppose. So that could have something to do with it too. Just an executive saying, hey, I'm forecasting our growth is going to stunt and we should probably prepare, for the latter. So yeah, there's a lot of different things to consider with this situation over there. And then Pat McAfee coming in, like, interesting, right? Interesting, because he has his own team of entertainers himself, and he's not going to go anywhere without them. So we'll have to see how that translates here in the next few months.
Speaking of Pat McAfee, he had a big statement at the ESPYS last night, Wednesday night, if I'm not mistaken. And the ESPYS honored a lot of athletes, a lot of big moments. Obviously, the most touching one was Damar Hamlin, honoring the Buffalo Bills staff for the way they treated him after the horrific ordeal in Cincinnati. But there was an incident at the ESPYS that got a lot of attention, particularly with LeBron James was talking about he's going to be coming back. Former ESPN host and now the host of the Dan Patrick Show, Dan Patrick, who was known for NBC Sunday Night Football back in the day, he had some comments about LeBron James saying that, why was ESPN making it such a big deal? He just said he's coming back. He didn't necessarily retire. It wasn't a breaking news thing. And when he was also referencing back to when Mike Malone, the head coach of the world champion Denver Nuggets, gotta put that in there and give them their props, the world champion Denver Nuggets, after the Nuggets won game 4 and swept the LA Lakers, cameras were focused on LeBron walking off. They didn't pay any attention to the Denver Nuggets getting their Western Conference Finals champion gear. There was also the talk of retirement that kind of overshadowed the Nuggets crowning moment. Malone had previously mentioned after game 1, after they beat LA, that the narrative was all about the Lakers. They're not giving the Nuggets any credit. When you hear Dan Patrick say stuff like that, and then you see Mike Malone say stuff like that, do you think that there is a bias to Los Angeles and ESPN was somewhat disappointed over the fact that it's not LA in the finals, it's going to be Denver instead, which doesn't really have the glitz and glamour that the network would be looking for?
Well, that whole situation was summed up with Jokic saying, I can't wait to get the hell out of here. I want to go to Serbia, right? Like, he muffled that entire championship with a sentence. Dan Patrick, it's funny. I have some experience with Dan Patrick because my grandfather watches him religiously. and I'll always try to play devil's advocate and just argue everything Dan says. Because I mean, that's part of growing. Finding a way to make something make sense, even if you don't necessarily believe it yourself, right? That means that you're willing to switch sides and be dynamic. That way, when you're in the middle, you're really getting the best of both sides of an argument. And so Dan Patrick Malone, Dan Patrick reminds me of Coward, right? And in a way that they have a brand, they have a voice, they have a way that they like to do things, but they're paid to have takes, to have hot takes, to cause maybe not controversy, but to say things that will omit a reaction or emit a reaction, right? They need that. And so in regard to the bias in LA, it's no different than the Yankees in the MLB or the Cowboys in the NFL, right? Like, yeah, every league kind of has that team that like hogs the primetime, spotlight, right? Or has the superstars that are hogging the news, right? And it's getting better, right? You're seeing the slow rise of franchises, and they'll come up and down. And who knows? Maybe we'll see Denver for the next 2-3 years. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. That is a solid 5-man squad that they have. And Aaron Gordon's one of my favorite pieces of that squad, because I don't even know how you fit Aaron Gordon into a scheme, but man, he does a good job no matter where he's at. When he was in Orlando, I mean, he's awesome. So anyway, yeah, and that kind of goes back to the ESPN thing. Dan Patrick and Colin Cowherd, they have a brand to represent. They have a reputation to uphold, and they don't want to change because what they've done has worked for decades. Right. And so LA bias, I think, yeah, the NBA would have loved for LeBron to keep on going. Right. Anytime LeBron is in a playoff series, their social media content, their writers, everyone's got something to write about. I did love at the ESPYS, by the way, last night, his daughter stopping the mom before she dropped the F-bomb. I just thought that was funny. It's scripted, whatever. It's hilarious. I love sports entertainment. That's when you bring the family in, that's when it's at its finest. Mama Kelsey for the Super Bowl, stuff like that. It's super, super heartwarming. So, but anyway, yeah, LA bias, it's there. Dodgers, it's there. And it'll always be there because that's Hollywood, man. They are drama. They're surrounded by drama. And ultimately that spotlight's never going to shine too far away from the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and areas of the country like that, where you've got superstars of all magnitudes and all, professions just hanging around.
No question about it. And it's good to hear from someone on that, playing with somewhat of a devil's advocate, because I wrote an article today for fansided.com, particularly that talked about Dan Patrick backed up Mike Malone's statement. It was all about the Lakers. And in a way, I did feel kind of bad for Denver because, they won. Usually when you win, you get your credit. But it was kind of sullied because someone else wanted to make the narrative about them, and the network kind of gobbled it up in that regard. But back to something a little bit more our area, the NFL. The season's about to kick off. You're a fantasy football kind of guy. I rely on Pro Football Focus for my numbers. I've noticed you tend to do your own work on this information. Now I'm not sure if you use other sites to help you prepare with that stuff, but you tend to make decisions. And in a lot of the spaces that we've been in, for the Bengals specifically, when people ask, well, what's projections for these players, you've given really detailed information that allows those fans, including Zim, who leads everything, they're allowed to be themselves and they get a better understanding of it. So when they root for the team, they can say, okay, this is what predictions are saying in terms of statistics. We're not wins or losses. How close are we if we were to place a bet on something, or do we want to see them do it? So specifically with the Bengals, they've kind of reloaded this year. They really feel like this is the year they're going to go to the Super Bowl and win it. They were in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. You and I were in that space, and we saw those heartbroken fans after LA, ironically, was the one that took it from them. They talked a little too much last year, lost to Kansas City. Travis Kelce, who's not exactly an innocent talker himself, ran his mouth. So as it pertains to the Bengals specifically, do they have a legitimate shot to win it in Vegas this year, and why?
Yes, I want to make sure I say that, and that's not just for Zim. If he hears this, not just for you, but yes, they do. And I love Zim. He's very optimistic, and I think that more fans should be. Even though if you talk to me about Dallas right now, I don't think I could be. But that being said, let's stick with Cincinnati. So Cincinnati, arguably, there's been two things that have really stopped them from really running away with games. Okay, and that has largely been injuries in the defensive backfield. Okay, they've been I think it was a Awuzie, right, last year.
Chidobe, yep.
Yeah, so they've had tough breaks. Okay, and it is really hard to stay healthy for 18 weeks, let alone into the postseason. So that's part of it. I'm not making excuses for them, but that hurts somebody, right? Because the defensive backfield really is all connected on a string. I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso, where he made everyone run around with their a string tied around their crotch, but like that's a defensive backfield. Okay, they
Absolutely.
should be moving and filling pieces of a pie, right? For lack of better analogy. So yeah, that played into it. But what I really want to emphasize with Cincinnati is the run game's there. Okay. But man, they could really start doing damage if they can pull people into the box. Okay. And that is very old school and it's very cliche to say. Okay. I love Joe Mixon. I think he's worth every penny that Cincinnati's paid him. And I would really like to see them on the offensive line pass protection translate from run blocking. I've always taught like high schoolers, even the junior high kids I coach. If you can pass pro, that's great. Okay, that means you can step backward, you can punch, and you have a good center of gravity. That's all good and great. But if you can pass pro aggressively, right, and that doesn't mean reach, that doesn't mean lunge, that doesn't mean give up your center of gravity necessarily. But it's the run game. It's a balancing act, right? And I was just talking to someone about Kansas City when Tyreek Hill was there. And what makes Tyreek Hill so good is 50-50 ball, maybe. He's got great hands for his size, right? And he's a lot better at a 50-50 situation than he should be. But what makes Tyreek Hill so good is when teams start to sink into that box, he will take the lid off of anybody in a matter of seconds, right? And that's Jamar Chase. And Tyler Boyd was my flex player in fantasy last year. Great asset. I think he's still there. Who's I think in I had Jacoby Myers. He's playing. He moved over somewhere.
He went to the,
From the
he's with the Raiders right now.
Yeah, the Raiders are gonna be interesting. But anyway, so long story short, yeah, Bengals, yes. Joe Burrow is top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL at all times. I wouldn't argue that at all. Top 2 probably. Great player, great mind, great leader, and he's a very consistent person. He's emotionally a consistent human being. And in a locker room, from a coaching perspective, you appreciate guys like him just as much as the value they bring and the discipline that he has with such little experience in comparison to my guy Dak over at Dallas. It's Cincinnati, Kansas City, and the AFC. Yes, they should be running the show. My hot take this year has been I love Pittsburgh. I love what they've done. They're sneaky good. Miami is a powder keg. I don't think they have the run game to pass the ball like they want to. So I think that's something I want to see from Miami is a little bit more balance, and that pass game will be a lot more effective when you start to pull people and you use misdirection. And so I think that the AFC is a big question mark. It really is. It always is. I mean, the NFL that's the best part about professional football. And people are like, I just like college. It's more fun to watch. And I'm like, no, man. If you dive into the NFL, first of all, it's impossible to know what's going to happen, but it's also very, very fun to see a game that is an offense and a defense that is largely the same fundamentally. Conceptual football has not changed that much, and it's the way to make it look different, right? It's a way to take a tendency of a different team, right? When you're looking at a defensive tendency and alignment, or you're looking at an offensive tendency and alignment, you're going to run that same smash concept 50 different ways. You're going to run that same corner curl from a million different directions. You can motion into it, you can invert it, you can do it 1,000 different ways, and that's what makes the NFL fun to watch. It is a chess game. And I'm sure we'll get into that later on too. But yeah, Cincinnati, they've got all the tools. Their offense is super impressive. It's very, very evenly spread out. And who'd they just grab at tight end?
Irv Smith, I think.
Yeah, is it Irv Smith at Cincinnati?
I believe so.
Yeah, because I know Hayden Hurst was an exit guy. So
yeah, he left.
Cincinnati's gonna be tough. So that's kind of my take on Cincinnati. Shout out Zim. I cheer for you guys unless you're playing Dallas. You know that. So
yeah. Well, obviously, we wish we could talk all this, but time's obviously ticking on us. So to wrap it up with your NFL knowledge, we're just going to go division by division. Just give me your division champions for this upcoming season. Let's go start with the AFC East.
Oh, my goodness. Let's go NFC first. The AFC,
all right. Think about. All right, NFC East. Who you got?
Philly.
NFC North?
Toss-up, hot take, Chicago Bears.
Hey, I'm with
I
you on
got
that one.
I got you.
I'm with you on that one. NFC South.
I want so badly to believe in Carolina.
Hmm.
In a weird way, that division is it is what it is. I
Right.
like CJ Stroud. I think he was the best draft pick this year, aside from Jackson Smith and Jigba in Seattle. Those are my top two guys. Those were those teams. They've got years with those guys. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, with Bryce Young in Carolina. All right.
Oh,
NFC.
excuse me, not CJ Stroud. He's down there in Houston.
Yeah, right. That's fine. Um, so you got Carolina in the South. How about the West? NFC West.
Um, Seattle, for
Mm.
the reason being Kenneth Walker.
Nice. All
Yeah.
right, now AFC West.
Oh, I gotta be honest. It's pretty obvious. I feel
Hmm.
right. But yeah, I'll go Kansas City.
Fair enough. The AFC South. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. I really like Jacksonville.
Hmm.
Okay. I really like Christian Kirk. He was a guy for my draft fantasy football guys. Christian Kirk is a really good asset this year. Um, Production will be good. So that's that. I really like Jacksonville, what they have over there.
The AFC North.
Um, I like the Steelers.
Steelers. Okay. It's
I
not
do.
really a it's not really a hot take, but at the same
That
time,
division's been so
that is tough.
broken. It's been so broken, and Pittsburgh, Cleveland's Cleveland. Pittsburgh to me, um,
Yeah.
I really like Pickens and I really like Najee Harris. And I believe it's Allen Robinson now that's there. And talk about fantasy football guy. If Pickett can figure it out and not make the mistakes, it's asking a lot of that kid. They're going to be good.
All right. And last but not least, the AFC East.
Hmm. I don't dare say this. I wish PD was here to hear me say it. The Jets.
You really think the Jets going to win that division?
I think that Aaron Rodgers with Garrett Wilson and
Mm.
Alan Lazard, and they got that Bengals tight end Uzuma, or I don't want to butcher his
Yep.
last name, who
Uzama. Yep.
had his best year in Cincinnati the year that he left. I couldn't believe Cincinnati went away from him or let him out, I guess, for lack of better terms. Um, I don't remember the circumstances behind that,
Right.
but I think he has enough. And Brees Hall, shoot, man, it's still Aaron Rodgers. I don't care how old that guy is. He is a conceptual genius, and I trust him with the ball in the fourth quarter still. So I like the Jets. I think their defense is spicy. I think it's quick, not just because of Sauce. I think that they are well rounded, and Rodgers is he's a dog in the locker room. So we'll see what that does to that roster.
Sounds good to me. And folks, that's going to wrap it up here on the SG3 podcast. Thank you all for listening. Alex, always is a pleasure. The very first guest to ever appear on the SG3 podcast. So for all of you trivia nerds out there, that's going to be a trivia question for all of you. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Give us a follow on our Twitter platforms. You'll find it on my Twitter page. You'll find Alex on his. And as always, thank you for listening to the SG3 podcast. I call it like I see it. Do you?